This video is about using Google as a research tool, especially using it as a research tool in public relations research. I want to introduce you to several really cool tools that Google has available. That includes Google Trends, Google News, Google Blogs, and iGoogle. Everybody knows how to do a regular Google search, but they have many useful tools, including Google Trends, which will tell you how often a phrase has been searched by Google users and also show you news volume of that same phrase. They have several powerful news searches. You can also search blogs. And if there's something you're really interested in, you can sign up for alerts, RSS feeds, etc., so that information from the World Wide Web out there gets pushed to you about a specific query term that you include. And finally, I'll show you how to use iGoogle so that you can receive alerts and RSS feeds. So let's get started and go look at regular old Google. One of the tools that I mentioned is Google Trends. If in regular old Google you type in trends, you will find Google Trends. Google Trends is a research tool that will give you the information about how often a term has been Googled and how often it appears in regular news. So let's start with something we understand. Kansas State University. If I were working in the communication and marketing department of Kansas State University, I would be very interested in what's going on out there as far as the number of people searching my university and how often it appears in news volume. So if I type in that query term into Google Trends and hit search, it will give me a report. And it looks pretty complicated, but let's slow down and take a look at what it's telling us. Okay? In this graph, it's giving us search volume index. This is how often people have typed in Kansas State University into a regular Google search since 2004. This lower part of the graph is giving me news reference volume, and it's saying how often that Kansas State University appeared in traditional U.S. media. So if we look at this, we need to think about the data as we interpret it. One thing I notice about search volume is there's an annual cycle. For each year, I notice that about in the middle of the year, towards the end of the year, the number of searches goes up. Well, let's think about that. It makes sense that Google searches for Kansas State University would follow an annual cycle. What we're seeing is as the academic year begins towards the fall of each annual year, that there's more interest. And that makes perfect sense, that there would be an annual cycle of searches. So if I'm working for the Public Relations Department or the Communication and Marketing Division of K-State, I need to be thoughtful about that, because if I measured volume in January and then measured volume in April, I would say, oh no, my interest is plummeting. That's not really true. It's just following a normal annual cycle. I also notice that since 2000, in general, if I drew a straight line through this data, the number of inquiries is going down. Now, should I worry about that? Because it's true, my Google inquiries are going down, but what's happened to our actual enrollment? Our actual enrollment's gone up. Why would there be fewer and fewer Google searches over this, 8-year span? Well, there's lots of different ways for people to find Kansas State University's website now, ways other than going through Google. For example, sometimes if I'm searching something on the internet, I'll just go to Wikipedia. And if I go to Wikipedia and type in Kansas State University, that's not going to show up on Google search trends, because this is only showing me how often people used Google as a search engine to find the phrase Kansas State University. So this is very powerful data, but anytime we interpret data, we need to be thoughtful about what it means to us. News reference volume. In general, on a national level, K-State's not getting a whole lot of news reference volume. Okay, but I do. What are these spikes about? I think that's interesting. So we'll come back to that idea. If I need to understand what this research tool is telling me, one of the things I can do is learn about those research tools by clicking these things. And if I click here on Learn More, it explains to me how that information is gathered, where they get it from, whether I can export the data. Also, can I use the data in other reports, um, which is all good things that I may want to understand. So always make sure to pay attention to these databases, where the information's coming from, and what it is they're trying to tell you. Let's go back to our findings from Google Trends about Kansas State University. Besides telling us search volume and news reference volume, it also tells us where this information came from as far as the Google searches. Okay. So if we look down here, we will see where the inquiries come from. Well, mostly from the United States, followed by India and China. That makes perfect sense because India and China are the countries that represent most of our international students. We also see that the majority of inquiries come specifically from geographically local places to Kansas State University. And it'll even tell us what languages. And the vast majority are English, which of course represents the United States and India. And the second most common language searching Kansas State University is Chinese. So a lot of information is there and available for us. But I'm interested in this news spike here in 2008. I want to know what happened back then that was so important that it caused a spike on a major level in how much attention was being paid to Kansas State University by the media at that time. Well, over here, you'll notice that they tell me a few stories. And while the elf is gone right here, it's interesting to note that this one is the Sexy and I Know It parody on YouTube. And if you haven't seen it, it's very cute, but it's two K-State students, and therefore Kansas State University got some attention over some behavior of some students. But if I click here and I go to more results about what's going on in the news at any given time, it will take me to the Google News search. So it's Google, but it's news as opposed to other things you could shop specifically on Google. This is Google News. And if you take a good look, the Google News search is very powerful. I can search blogs, but I'm going to stick with traditional news right now, and I can search them even longer before 2002, and I can even do a customized range. So when I saw that spike in 2008, I see that it happened right before mid-year when I pay attention to that. So I'm going to go back here and say what was going on in the 5th month of 2008. Okay. So one of the powers of this tool is that you can search news at a very specific time. And when I go back to that date, I see what happened at Kansas State University that accounts for that spike in news volume was when President Wefald announced his retirement at K-State. So Google Trends. I'm curious about all sorts of things, and I enjoy using Google Trends because as a person who pays attention to public relations and marketing and persuasive communication, I'm often curious about lots of things that goes on. So I've noticed lately that every time I go into a convenience store that there's a big display of beef jerky. It just wasn't true a few years ago that you would get all this beef jerky. So I'm going to look at the beef jerky trends since 2004. And what I see is there was basically very little media coverage up until 2009. And then in 2010 and 2011, all of a sudden, people are talking about beef jerky in U.S. traditional media. So I think that's curious. Okay? And then I look at the news volume, and there's a giant spike here. But since 2009, okay, I've seen a gradual increase in Google inquiries about beef jerky. That just seems sort of strange to me. I wonder why that happened. Okay, is it because there's more distributors of beef jerky? Is it because of the Jack Link Sasquatch messing with Sasquatch commercials? Is it because people are really interested in low carb diets these days? I don't really know because I haven't researched it. But I've also been observing that all of a sudden everybody's wearing these funny boat shoes that are called Sperry's. So when I use Google Trends to look at Sperry's, I see that Sperry's went along for a while at a steady rate, and then in 2010, the number of inquiries really started to go up. Wow. However, when I look at news reference volume, the reference volume of news isn't having a very distinct line of like Google inquiries. So these lines between search volume and news reference, a lot of people would think that these lines are always going to be parallel, but it's not true. Sometimes general interest or Google inquiries will precede news coverage. So something will get cool out there and then the news will start covering it. Sometimes these lines are parallel, and sometimes an idea will start in the news and then catch on among the general public. So that's interesting to note that in the case of Sperry's, what we've got going on here is a real rise in general interest that's not reflected in traditional media. I also wondered why about that, and so did a group of students in MC 382. So, what those students did was they did a case study that specifically examined why is Google Trends, why are Sperry shoes so popular? And if you're interested, the answer to that question can be found in a 7-minute YouTube video at this address because they asked that question and went about researching why it was that Sperry shoes had become so popular in the last few years. So, this has given me Google search volume and this has given me news reference volume. Now, are there other ways that people talk about things? Well, of course there are. So this has given me traditional news media. How can I understand what's going on in social media out there? Well, one of the other tools that Google has is a blog searching function. So if I want to know what's going on in general buzz out there, I can search blogs. I can either type blog search into Google, or I could have used this function here. Google blog search. Okay. Using Google blog search, I can put in the shoe name brand, Sperry, and see what I come up with. And it's going to give me all sorts of information about Sperry topsiders and what blogs they're showing up in and all sorts of stuff. But let's just pretend that I work for Sperry and I'm really interested in knowing exactly what's going on out there. And I want to know every time Sperry shows up in anybody's blog out there that's being monitored by Google. So I can choose to have information pushed to me from the World Wide Web using Google as a function. I can sign up for email alerts, which means I'd get an email every time Sperry shows up in anybody's blog, whether that's this blog or that blog. Or I can add a blog search gadget to my Google homepage, or I can subscribe to a search feed, or I can get a RSS feed. So, what are all these things? Well, all of these things are different ways that you can have the internet push information to you. So, if I worked for Kansas State University in communication and marketing, I would subscribe to one of these services, which are free, so that I would know every time Kansas State University shows up anywhere. So I'm going to do it for Sperry. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to add a blog search gadget to my Google home page. Not everybody knows that Google will offer you a home page function, but they will. Okay? And I can add that. Well, I've already added it. So let's go look at what an iGoogle page looks like. This is an iGoogle page, and basically what it is a dashboard that you can design for yourself. This is my iGoogle page, and where I asked for the gadget telling me what's going on in blogs wherever the term Sperry shows up, this is that gadget right here. But you can add gadgets from wherever you want. Your calendar, your local weather. In this case, it's a National Public Radio. There's my email. You can see how much of my AT&T bill is this month, date and time. You can have YouTube gadget. You can CNN gadget. Whatever you want to have sort of your dashboard to start your day. So as if I was working in a public relations department for Kansas State University or for Sperry Shoes or for Jack Link's beef jerky, I would be wanting to pay attention to what sort of buzz is going on out in blogosphere, and I would get me a gadget so that information would be pushed to me about what's going on and what time terms and where my idea is and how it's being treated out there by a general public. Let's go back to Google Trends, okay, and ask some more questions about things and look at the relationships between media coverage and Google searches. Reddit is probably something that you know about. Reddit has become extremely popular among internet users lately. Okay. And what I see is that Reddit got a little bit of media attention in 2012. However, Reddit has been gaining popularity among Google users very steadily over the last 5 years. So this is one of those situations where media coverage and Google inquiries are not parallel at all. Here we have a total buzz phenomenon going on that is not really reflected in popular news media. So these lines are not correlating. They don't look alike. They're not following the same shape at all. Reddit is a phenomenon that is popular in the real world, not reflected in traditional media. I'm going to do another one, Sarah Palin. You remember Sarah Palin. Okay. If I look at Sarah Palin's Google Trend Report, I see that Google inquiries and media coverage are almost exactly parallel. Almost exactly. As a notable figure, it wasn't until the last half of 2008 that anybody heard of her, either in the media or out there in the Google inquiry world. So in this case, the lines are correlated almost exactly. So, and sometimes we have phenomena where people are paying attention to stuff and the media is not. Sometimes we have situations where the media is paying attention to stuff and people aren't. And sometimes we do get very parallel lines. So I'm going to put in Kim Kardashian because Sarah Palin is basically functioning like a celebrity. And here we have Kim Kardashian, and again we see a whole lot of correlation between these two lines. If we look at our news, Here she gets married, here she gets divorced. So that's kind of interesting. So you can use Google Trends to research all sorts of things of importance to you, sometimes just curiosity questions. But this is a very good way, for example, to research potential employers. So if you want to know about a company and their history and whether they've had scandals in their past, Google Trends is a great way to start. Okay, Summer 2012 Olympics. Let's look at the Olympics. Now, here we see trends over time that make sense. Okay, Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics. Every 4 years, we have two Olympic events. So this makes perfect sense. And what it says is that people aren't thinking about the Olympics very much in years where we don't have that as a media event. To show you some of Google's research tools. And we have looked at Google Trends, how to search Google News, how to use the Google blog search function, and also how you can use iGoogle as a way to have specific information pushed to you about what's going on in blogs, but you could also use that for what's going on in traditional news. This is just some of the tools out there to understand what's going on in internet world. There are other ways to get information. So, for example, you could actually get search tweets. But these are just some of the Google tools that are available, and I hope you enjoyed it.